if you're trying to help someone heal from stage 4 right now, you should absolutely use food. Because my dad, he initially got diagnosed with stage 4 metastatic cancer in November 2024. The doctors gave him like less than 1 year to live, maybe 1 year with treatment. But now, 16 months later, he was healthy enough to go with a trip with me and my brother to hike 75% of the way into the Grand Canyon, and his cancer showing up as undetectable on his scans. But of course, it wasn't all smooth, honestly. Previously to this 16 months and now undetectable, he had 2 reoccurrences that he genuinely thinks a huge part was because he changed things in his diet. So ideally, the information here is to help you not only avoid the bad, but craft your own food schedule to promote the healing as much as possible for that person in your life with cancer. So 4 parts. The first category is cancer fertilizer is the way you can think about it. And this is, you can think about, okay, what does cancer eat? Of course, cancer is a cell, right? So it has to get energy in some way, whether that's sugar, whether that's some way it's using protein, whether there's some way it's using fats or hormones or whatever, really, right? Every cancer is unique. It uses fuel in different ways. But the one thing I will talk about is sugar, because all cancer will use sugar in some capacity, some more than less. But in my dad's case, his cancer used a lot of sugar. And this is just based on research that I've done and we've talked to oncologists and whatnot, and you should do the same. But see, initially, my dad was like, oh yeah, I can eat my granola. I can like pop my Altoids while I'm driving. I can eat my candy. I can pop Tic Tacs. I can eat my pastries. It makes me feel good. That stress reduction is good for me. It's healthy. Just eating these things. And oh, okay, sugar's bad for me. I can just go burn it off and, by working out. But the thing is, okay, well, my dad did that. He very literally did that. And I mentioned it's probably not so great for him, but he ignored it. And then on top of that, he decided, oh, I don't have that much time left. So he went on his own trip, and in this trip, there was a buffet because he was going to some sort of event, and there was tons of desserts, right? So he wouldn't eat any of the regular food. He was like, oh, I don't have that much time left. I might as well just eat all the desserts. It feels good, makes me feel good. So full plates of desserts, multiple plates of dessert, tons and tons of sugar. And by the time he came back, his pain probably doubled. And physically, you could see it. Like his neck was like swelling to the point where you could almost see he has no neck. Like you could not see his jawline anymore, like at all, not even close. So that was the bad example. Essentially, he very literally did the experiment of the sugar for his cancer in the bad way. And then, so he realized that like, oh shit, getting that sugar in, it very literally almost doubled the size of the cancer in like a couple of weeks. So from that point on, he's like, oh, screw it, I'm cutting out all sugar. And then he actually did feel better. Of course, that is just one part on top of the treatments is to support it. But he felt better from that because what are you doing? You're cutting off that cancer fertilizer, right? If you take a plant, let's say you have the cactus, and you stop giving it water because that's what it needs to live, well, it's going to start to not grow as well, at least, right? Same thing with the cancer. You're going to help slow it down. So whatever you're doing, whether that's the body healing or the treatments, to work a bit better. And for you specifically, since sugar is a very good point, and you can look into Thomas Seyfried. He's probably the biggest proponent of this. He's a biologist, a researcher in cancer, basically the main person right now in the metabolic approach to cancer. So trying to starve cancer out with the pathways that the cancer uses for fuel. So look into him. I genuinely recommend looking into him. But for you right now, and just focusing on sugar to help your family member, whoever you're caring for, realize that, okay, maybe this is something that I may want to cut out, and also how to figure it out. So you ask, do they need sugar? You can literally ask them, right? Do they need sugar? Or do you need sugar? Ask. And well, if you think about it, well, what is sugar? Just pure calories, right? Could you get calories somewhere else? Yes, you can. So you'll probably find, or I mean, you figure out what the answer is here, right? And number 2 is, do you want sugar? And well, my dad, well, yes, he does. But does he want it enough? Is the pros really outweigh the cons? You ask that question. And number 3, is the sugar helping you more, or is it helping the cancer more? And now you go through these things, and if you find that the answer to these 3 questions is no, well then, and the person that you're caring for, they realize this, and you don't tell them the answer, right? You just ask them, and if they realize in themselves that it is all no, then they will likely just stop on their own and stop fertilizing that cancer, essentially. And now, the most tricky one is, do they want it? But here's the thing. Do they actually want the sugar, or do they just want something sweet? Can you find a replacement? Like, can you use erythritol or xylitol or allulose or stevia or monk fruit? Right. And of course, you do your research, find what's right for you, and also approved by your medical team. But those are all alternatives, right? To stop fertilizing the cancer. But once you stop fertilizing the cancer, you may start to realize, like, okay, what other things I could put in my diet? And that's very important, right? Very important. And you'll probably think, oh, well, might as well eat more fats and eat more proteins. But actually, that is the other thing that my dad did, which was the reason he thinks was his first reoccurrence. Of course, there are other things in play, like certain events that made him stressed out. But during that time, when he had that first recurrence, he started eating a lot of more protein, and specifically in protein powder, like protein shakes. And you can think of this for you. Think of this section like macro, balancing your macros correctly to similarly not feed the cancer. And this is something not from me. Literally, Thomas Zayfried, so the guy about metabolic cancer, the researcher, he said protein literally turns into chocolate cake. But that's for a very specific reason. When your body has excess proteins, and my dad was chugging these shakes because he thought they were good for him, right? So he was chugging these shakes. And well, when your body has excess proteins, it converts those proteins into energy. So what, I don't know the science perfectly, whether your body's using it to storage or whatever, but either way, it converts it to energy. And well, where does that energy go? That energy goes into the blood. And of course, you can do your own research here, but will the cancer get some of that? Most likely. And for my dad specifically, since like say whey protein, which is most likely in the shakes and what he was eating, that would be almost more protein than the body could metabolize, his body. And since he wasn't actually working out that much to actually utilize those proteins, it would spike his blood sugar and then feed the cancer. And then what my dad thinks and what similarly what I think contributed to that first reoccurrence that he had. So for you to avoid this thing specifically, okay, again, I mentioned macro balancing. So that's the proteins, the fats, and the carbs. You may have decided to lower it, but I'm focusing on the protein here. The questions that you should ask to really figure out what's right for you is how much do you really need? And is the proteins that you're eating fast or slow? Like my dad, he was eating a lot of lean chicken, Greek yogurt, whey protein. These are very fast. So your body has to either metabolize it really fast or just change it into sugar. And once realizing that, my dad, answering that question, he decided, let me switch to slower proteins. And then the how much question is like, I don't actually work out that much. So do I need 150 grams of protein? Probably not. Maybe just lower it down. And for my dad, well, we don't exactly calculate how much protein he's getting. He just kind of eats the food that he eats. Once he feels full, then we just assume like the body's intelligent, knows how much protein he needs. But once you answer those questions, right? And it's not necessarily you answering the questions. You ask these and you observe and you help them decide, like how I helped my dad decide what is right for him. But now logically, you got the carbs dialed in, the sugars, the cancer fertilizers, you're starting to get the macro, like the proteins dialed in. So your next logical thing, and honestly what we thought, right? My dad, he was like, let's move to fats. Like I should just eat more fat, right? Because that's the only thing that's okay. But this is now what I think, and also my dad believes, led to his second reoccurrence. And this, I don't remember exactly. Maybe it's like 12 months in. And this was potentially, I think, the worst thing my dad could have done because he was in a really good place. And honestly, my dad, he has a lot of regret about it, but he's now overcome it. Again, got undetectable. So he's okay about it now. So where it started was my dad got radiation treatment for that first reoccurrence. And this was a recurrence, again, in his place of origin, in his nose area. So during radiation, of course, if you get something similar, you can look at your side effects. But a side effect from my dad is that he would get like mouth sores and like everything in his mouth was kind of messed up. So it is very difficult for him to eat anything. Everything was dry. Everything felt hard. Everything like created mouth sores in his mouth. And honestly, it didn't even taste good to him. Like he couldn't taste anything because of that radiation treatment. So he started to lose weight. And the main thing that the medical team was saying was like, you got to, maintain that weight, maintain that weight, maintain that weight. So he got stuck in his mind like, maintain weight. And he forgot about the actual quality of the foods that he was eating. But since, we went through that stuff before, he's like, fats is probably fine. So in order to maintain, what fat can I eat that goes down easy? And he decided, peanut butter, right? Because like, if you know about like things that they do overseas to help these like starving people eat, there's a specific product called Plumpy Nut, which is essentially peanut butter. And because it's very good at like fattening people up, and it's very easy to digest and whatnot because it's like quite processed. So that's what my dad did. He acted like he was like a starving person in another country, and almost every 2 hours he would eat the peanut butter, just a scoop here, scoop here, scoop here, and you would wake up in the night, oh, I just have another scoop of peanut butter, and he wouldn't really be eating real food. Well, okay, fats might actually be okay. And of course, you got to research your specific cancer because, cancer can utilize fat, some cancer in some way. And literally cancer is utilizing fat in some way, right? Because, I don't remember if you remember back in science class, the cell walls are made from a lipid bilayer, which is fat, right? So cancer does use fat in some way. But for my dad specifically, he felt fat was fine. Although what was the real issue is frequency, okay? So what happens when he eats all the time? Every single time he eats, blood sugar goes up a little bit. Every time he eats, insulin goes up a little bit. What is insulin? Insulin growth factor. And well, what is blood sugar? Blood sugar is sugar. What do these things do? Insulin growth factor, insulin growth hormone. Cancer uses that to grow. Sugar, of course, that's the cancer fertilizer. So by just simply frequently eating something that he thought was good, okay, later on we decided peanut butter is not so great for him, but regardless, that frequency of eating, no matter what it was, literally fed his cancer. At least that's what my dad thinks. Of course, you do your research. So the questions for you to really implement this for you and your family member is how much and when. So let's say similar to my dad, they're in a place, maybe they got radiation, they can't eat too much. Well, how much can they eat? And then, okay, what window can you fit that in? Can you fit it into like a 4-hour window, a 6-hour window, an 8-hour window, and maybe eat like one meal in the beginning, one meal at the end? But you make sure not to like constantly snack to like spike that blood sugar and insulin, right? Constantly, and keep it at an elevated level. What window can you really fit it in? And for my dad specifically, he was able to eventually, he started out with like just eating from around lunchtime to maybe 6 o'clock dinner time. And he was able to shrink that over time to just maybe a 4-hour eating window, eating from like 3 to about 7 o'clock. So of course, don't follow this, right? You're in a different situation and you may have to start somewhere else and may find something else works better for you. So the key thing is just realize it does matter how many times you're eating and when you're eating. And now at this point, you're probably thinking, okay, this is getting really complex and really specific to the person that I'm trying to help. Well, to make it a lot simpler for you, I actually did create my full roadmap of protocols that I actually have inside my free community that essentially are all the questions that you can ask, the different resources that you can pull from. I even have templates, which you can literally just take and get organized with. On top of that, since it is a community, you can very literally interact with me, interact with other people in a similar situation to kind of just bounce ideas off, brainstorm, get some support. If that sounds helpful for you, top link in the description, you can get all of that stuff completely for free. All the information there is free. But to finish things off, there's one more piece for my dad, which was the last piece to really crafting the diet that we think helped him heal as much as possible and recover from that second reoccurrence. And this is what I call the category of secondary ingredients. So once you figure out like, okay, when you're eating the carbs, the sugars, the fats, and you may think like, okay, well, anything in these, like with these type of macros is fine. And something that you may look at is probably dairy, right? In like say cheese or milk, because these things, they're pretty high in fat. They're, at least the cheeses, they're pretty low in carbs and they're relatively moderate actually in the protein. So they look more like this in terms of macros, higher in the fat. So you would think like, oh, the cancer, at least my dad's cancer, since it's more reliant on sugar, it's much better for him. And, also doesn't spike his protein because it has that less protein. And this actually was something that my dad was eating before his second reoccurrence, was a lot of cheese. Again, it sort of comes back to that frequency of eating. Remember I mentioned the insulin growth factor. Well, very literally in dairy, there's insulin in there. On top of the insulin, there's a little bit of lactose in there. And the lactose is very literally sugar, right? So even though it has that profile, since these are super like fast acting things in the body, and very literally that the insulin, the growth factor, and think about milk in general, they feed those cows a lot of growth hormones, and say you're eating that, right? And my dad's eating that. Well, is that going to help his cancer? Most likely not, right? And of course, we didn't have no scientific study or anything like that, but will cutting this out of his diet actually hurt him? No, not really. He could just eat something else, right? He could just go eat some meat instead. So my dad cut that out and he felt better. So for you specifically, okay, look at these secondary ingredients, like similar to that cheese. What else is in there? Another example is the heavy cream my dad was eating and putting into his coffee, because we moved away from like sugary creams like coffee mate, stuff like that, tons of sugar in there, to move to like heavy cream. But once I looked at the ingredients list, like, oh, it has gel and gum. Well, that thing, it's an inflammatory. Does it help him heal? No, it doesn't. Is it beneficial at all? No, it's just literally a chemical to help keep that heavy cream from separating. So he didn't totally cut it at this point, but he just uses like very, very tiny amounts of that heavy cream. And he's starting to try to find an alternative right now. And then on top of that stuff in the dairy, right, it is the protein. That specific protein, similarly like I mentioned before, in milk, a lot of it is whey. Whey is that fast-acting protein. So what you should actually do as the caregiver and really to find these things out is, number one, what is the actual components other than the macros? Just like those things I mentioned in dairy. What is the actual effects in the body? Like, is the growth hormone, what is it doing, right? Or the whey, what is it doing? And then once you realize those things and you can decide whether that is conducive healing or not conducive healing, then you ask, okay, what are the alternatives? And are those alternatives actually better? Then you make the switch, of course. And if you have any concerns, make sure, of course, talk to that medical team, talk to your dietitian. I'm sure there's a dietitian at your hospital they can get a hold of to make sure nothing in terms of treatments or anything like that is going to be bad. But regardless, this is the over 1.5 year process that my dad used in order to get from stage 4 metastatic to undetectable. Hopefully this at least gives you a starting point so you can craft that diet specifically for you and the person in your life who has cancer, so you can do it much faster than what it took me and my dad in that 1.5 years. Now, if you found this video very helpful, YouTube also thinks this video will be most helpful for you to watch next. Alternatively, you can watch my latest video right here.